It's a crisp October evening in East Hampton, New York. The quiet streets are lined with sprawling mansions, white fences, and manicured hedges. Out here, life feels untouched by the chaos of the outside world. It's the kind of place where neighbors sip wine on porches, where weekend retreats are marked by laughter echoing from tennis courts and the splash of swimming pools. But on this night in 2001, behind the locked doors of one of these grand estates, a secret was about to unfold, one that would shatter the illusion of safety and wealth forever. This is the story of Ted Ammon, a man who seemed to have everything: success, riches, a beautiful family, and a home in one of the wealthiest corners of America. Yet his life would end violently, brutally, and mysteriously. The question that has haunted the Hamptons ever since is simple: who killed Ted Ammon? Before we dive deeper, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our crime stories. And drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from. As for me, I'm posting this video all the way from a trenches down in Georgia. To understand what happened, we must first understand who Ted was. Born into modest beginnings, Ted Ammon was not handed wealth that built it. After excelling in school, he climbed the corporate ladder in the high-stakes world of investment banking. His brilliance and ambition propelled him to the top, and by the late 1990s, Ted was worth tens of millions of dollars. With his wealth came prestige. In New York's elite circles, he was admired not only for his financial acumen, but also for his philanthropy. He gave generously to schools, arts organizations, and community projects. Friends described him as sharp, charming, and always impeccably dressed. But it wasn't just business where Ted seemed to thrive. He also found love, or so it appeared, when he met Generosa Rand, a striking woman with artistic ambitions and a fiery personality. Their relationship moved quickly, and soon they were married, building a life that outsiders envied. Together, they adopted twin children from Ukraine, a boy and a girl whom they named Greg and Alexa. To anyone watching, the Ammons were the picture of a successful family. They split their time between Manhattan and their lavish East Hampton estate, a sprawling mansion that looked like something from a lifestyle magazine. The Hamptons house was not just a retreat, it was a statement, a symbol of wealth, permanence, and the life Ted had earned. But appearances are deceiving. Behind the high walls of the Ammon estate, life was far less perfect than it seemed. Those who knew Ted and Generosa intimately described a marriage full of tension. Generosa, while vibrant and creative, was also known for her temper. Friends recalled her sudden outbursts, her jealous streak, and her relentless need for control. Ted, for his part, was not without flaws. He was consumed by work, often distant, and increasingly tired of Generosa's volatility. Arguments between them escalated from private quarrels to public scenes. The marriage was becoming toxic, and both of them knew it. By 2001, divorce was inevitable. But this wasn't just any divorce. It was a battle for millions of dollars in assets, homes, and the custody of their beloved twins. For Generosa, the divorce was more than the end of a marriage. It was, in her mind, a betrayal that demanded revenge. It was around this time that another man entered the picture. His name was Daniel Pelosi. He was everything Ted wasn't: brash, rough around the edges, and far from wealthy. Pelosi was an electrician by trade, but he carried himself with swagger. To some, he was charming in a reckless way. To others, he was dangerous. Generosa met him during renovations and quickly fell under his spell. To outsiders, their relationship was puzzling. Why would a woman of immense wealth and refinement be drawn to a man like Pelosi? But those who knew Generosa said it made sense. He was the opposite of Ted, rebellious, defiant, and willing to feed her resentment against her estranged husband. Soon, Pelosi wasn't just Generosa's boyfriend. He became part of her world, living in the East Hampton mansion, driving luxury cars, and boasting about his new life. He didn't hide his disdain for Ted, and it wasn't long before friends and acquaintances began to worry that this triangle, Ted, Generosa, and Pelosi, was a recipe for disaster. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, Ted's frustration grew. He confided in friends that he was worried about the influence Pelosi had on Generosa and the children. The tension was palpable, the stakes enormous. Millions of dollars, a lavish lifestyle, and the future of two young children hung in the balance. Generosa, meanwhile, seemed to be hardening. Her anger toward Ted only deepened, and with Pelosi at her side, she appeared emboldened. Together, they presented a united front against Ted. Friends of Pelosi would later testify that he often spoke about Ted, sometimes with venom, sometimes with chilling humor. He allegedly bragged about taking care of Ted, remarks that at the time were brushed off as bluster. But looking back, they sound like warnings of what was to come. By the fall of 2001, the storm was ready to break. And on one October night, it finally did. The last days of Ted Ammon's life seemed strangely ordinary. He spent time at his East Hampton home, went about his routines, and prepared for another week of work. But friends noticed he seemed tired, even distracted. Some say he sensed the tension was reaching its peak. On October 20th, Ted retreated to his mansion for what should have been a peaceful weekend. He was alone. No children. No Generosa. Just him and the quiet of his sprawling estate. But behind the closed doors of that grand home, someone else may have been watching. Someone who had been waiting for the perfect opportunity. Within 48 hours, Ted Ammon would be found dead. October 22nd, 2001. The sun rises slowly over East Hampton. The beaches glisten, and the air carries the salty smell of the Atlantic. For most residents, it's another calm Monday morning. But for one man, the day never comes. Inside his grand mansion, the lifeless body of Ted Ammon lies sprawled on the floor of his bedroom. He has been savagely beaten, his skull fractured in multiple places. The quiet elegance of the home is shattered by the horror of blood splattered against its white walls. This isn't a robbery gone wrong. Nothing valuable is missing. The brutality of the attack makes it clear. This was personal. Ted's friends are the first to sense something is wrong. He was expected back in Manhattan for business meetings. He was known for punctuality, for precision. When he failed to show, calls went unanswered. Alarm grew. Eventually, his business associates contacted a housekeeper who entered the mansion. What she found was chilling. Ted's body bludgeoned cold. Police were immediately called. Have you liked, comment, or subscribed? If not, please do, cause any of it will help this channel grow faster. When detectives arrived, the scene told them everything they needed to know. Ted had not simply died. He had been hunted inside his own home. No forced entry suggested that the killer either knew Ted or had access to the mansion. The murder weapon? Likely a blunt object, though it was never recovered. To investigators, one thing was clear. This was no random act of violence. The investigation turned quickly toward Ted's personal life. Detectives discovered that he was in the midst of a bitter divorce with his wife, Generosa. The divorce involved millions of dollars in property, custody of their twins, and an increasingly hostile legal battle. And then there was Daniel Pelosi, Generosa's new boyfriend. He was loud, boastful, and quick to flaunt his newfound access to Ted's money and lifestyle. Pelosi didn't hide his hatred for Ted, often mocking him to others. To police, the pieces began to align. A wealthy man, locked in a toxic divorce, with a rival who openly despised him. They now had both motive and opportunity. Detectives started to dig deeper. What they found was disturbing. Friends of Pelosi came forward with chilling stories. He had allegedly joked about killing Ted, sometimes laughing, sometimes deadly serious. Witnesses recalled him bragging that Ted wouldn't be a problem much longer. At first, these seemed like drunken boasts. But now they felt like confessions. There were also reports of Pelosi's erratic behavior. He was volatile, quick-tempered, and obsessed with money. He had gone from being a struggling electrician to living in luxury almost overnight, driving expensive cars, wearing fine clothes, and spending weekends in mansions. The suspicion only deepened when detectives pieced together the timeline. Pelosi had access to the East Hampton home. He knew Ted's routines. And most importantly, he had a reason to want Ted gone. While investigators built their case, Generosa's behavior raised eyebrows. Rather than being crushed by grief, she appeared cold, even distant. Just weeks after Ted's death, she married Pelosi in a quiet ceremony. To many, it felt like an insult, as though she were flaunting her new life on the grave of her murdered husband. Generosa inherited control of Ted's estate, giving her and Pelosi access to millions. For detectives, the motive was glaringly obvious. But proving it would be another matter entirely. The challenge for investigators was clear. While suspicion was heavy, physical evidence was thin. There were no fingerprints, no weapon, and no direct witnesses to the murder. The case rested on circumstantial evidence, a dangerous position in court. Still, prosecutors believed they could prove their case. They leaned on witness testimony. Friends of Pelosi who recalled his violent threats, acquaintances who remembered his obsession with Ted's fortune, and moments where he had slipped details about the crime that only the killer could know. One chilling detail that surfaced was the possibility that Ted had been incapacitated with a stun gun before being beaten to death. While not conclusively proven, it added to the theory that Pelosi had planned the attack carefully. The murder of Ted Ammon became more than just a local crime story. It was a scandal that captivated the nation. Headlines screamed of the Hamptons murder, the perfect storm of wealth, betrayal, and greed. The media painted it as a real-life soap opera. The millionaire, the fiery wife, the reckless lover, and a brutal killing at the center of it all. Generosa became a figure of fascination. Some saw her as a grieving widow. Others saw her as a calculating woman who had orchestrated her husband's downfall. But before any legal case could reach her, fate intervened. In 2003, Generosa was diagnosed with breast cancer. Within months, she was dead, leaving behind the twins and her fortune. With her gone, the spotlight turned entirely onto Daniel Pelosi. By 2004, prosecutors were ready. The trial of Daniel Pelosi began, and with it, the unraveling of a twisted story. The prosecution laid out their case. Pelosi had murdered Ted in a fit of greed and rage, motivated by the promise of money and power that Generosa had offered. Witnesses described his violent temper, his threats, and his disdain for Ted. The circumstantial evidence was woven into a narrative that painted Pelosi as the only logical killer. The defense, meanwhile, argued that the evidence was weak. No fingerprints, no murder weapon, no eyewitness. They painted Pelosi as a scapegoat, a convenient villain in a messy family drama. But as the jury listened, one theme became undeniable. Someone had wanted Ted Ammon dead, and Pelosi had the most to gain. After weeks of testimony, the jury reached its decision. Daniel Pelosi was found guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence, 25 years to life in prison. As the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent. For Ted's friends and family, it was a moment of justice. But for Pelosi, it was the beginning of a new battle. He has maintained his innocence ever since, claiming he was framed, that others were involved, and that the truth has never been told. With both parents gone, Ted murdered and Generosa dead from cancer, the Ammon twins were left to grow up in the shadow of tragedy. Custody battles ensued, and questions over inheritance lingered. The story of Ted Ammon was no longer just about a murder. It was about the destruction of an entire family. The Hamptons would never forget. Behind the manicured lawns and summer parties, the name Ted Ammon became synonymous with betrayal, greed, and a crime that shattered the illusion of paradise. But the story does not end with a conviction. To this day, questions linger. Was Pelosi truly the killer, or was he a convenient scapegoat in a much larger conspiracy? The truth may have been buried along with Ted Ammon. The courtroom gavel had fallen. Daniel Pelosi was sentenced to 25 years to life. For prosecutors, the case was closed. For Ted Ammon's friends, justice, at least in part, had been served. But as the dust settled over East Hampton, the echoes of the murder refused to fade. Because while one man sat behind bars, questions remained. Was this really the full story? Or had the Hamptons' darkest secret been sealed away with lies, half-truths, and silence? At the center of the tragedy were Ted and Generosa's adopted twins, Greg and Alexa. They were just 10 years old when their father was murdered. Within 2 years, their mother would also be gone. Orphaned and caught in a storm of inheritance disputes, the children became symbols of the collateral damage of greed and violence. Different relatives and guardians fought for control, not only over the children's upbringing, but also the massive estate left behind. Eventually, the twins inherited the bulk of Ted's fortune. But no amount of money could erase what they had endured. Losing a father to murder, a mother to disease, and their childhood to scandal. As they grew older, the twins spoke candidly in rare interviews. They described a turbulent upbringing with Generosa, who, according to their accounts, was manipulative and controlling. They remembered Pelosi as volatile, sometimes cruel. Their reflections added a haunting dimension. Even in the years before the murder, the atmosphere at home was one of fear and instability. Generosa Ammon never stood trial, never faced formal charges. But in the court of public opinion, suspicion clung to her memory. Some believed she had orchestrated Ted's murder, using Pelosi as her weapon. Others argued that she was guilty only of bad choices, not murder. Her sudden death from cancer in 2003 left the truth buried with her. Was she the mastermind, or merely an accomplice by silence? Pelosi himself has insisted that Generosa played a central role. From prison interviews, he has claimed she manipulated him, that she wanted Ted out of the way, that he was left to take the fall. But without her alive to answer, those claims remain nothing more than echoes of a bitter man's defense. Since his conviction, Daniel Pelosi has never stopped talking. In interviews and letters, he maintains his innocence. He points to the lack of physical evidence. No fingerprints, no weapon, no direct witnesses. He insists he was targeted by prosecutors eager to close a high-profile case. Pelosi claims others were involved, that Ted had enemies in the financial world, or that Generosa herself pulled strings far deeper than anyone imagined. To his supporters, these claims raise doubts. To prosecutors, they're nothing more than the ramblings of a guilty man. Still, the fact remains. The conviction rested largely on circumstantial evidence and testimony from Pelosi's acquaintances. Enough for a jury, yes, but enough to silence doubt? That's another question entirely. The murder of Ted Ammon continues to resonate more than 2 decades later because it represents something larger than one man's death. It exposed the cracks in a world of privilege, showing that beneath the polished surface of the Hamptons, human nature is as raw and dangerous as anywhere else. Wealth, power, and status, none of it could shield Ted from betrayal. Instead, those very things may have hastened his downfall. His story became a cautionary tale, that when love turns to hatred and money becomes the weapon, even paradise can hide a nightmare. As time passes, certain questions linger like shadows. Did Daniel Pelosi truly act alone? Did Generosa know more than she ever admitted? And why, in such a meticulously planned killing, was the murder weapon never found? Some believe Pelosi may have had accomplices, friends or associates who helped him enter the house or cover his tracks. Others argue that Generosa's silence was as damning as any confession, that she may have encouraged or enabled the act even if she never wielded the weapon. And then there are those who wonder if the full truth will never be known, because the key players, Ted, Generosa, and Pelosi, were trapped in a toxic triangle that only death could untangle. For Greg and Alexa, the story is not just history. It's their life. They have carried the weight of their parents' choices and the shadow of their father's murder. Despite their inheritance, the scars of that loss remain. In interviews as adults, they have expressed frustration that the narrative often focuses on money and scandal, rather than the human cost. Ted Ammon was not just a financier or a victim in headlines. He was their father, and for them, justice has always felt incomplete. Ted Ammon's story is a reminder that even the most beautiful settings can hide the darkest truths. The Hamptons, a place of elegance and serenity, became the backdrop for betrayal and bloodshed. As the waves continue to crash against Long Island's shore, the mansion where Ted once lived stands as a silent witness. To outsiders, it's just another luxurious home. But to those who remember, it's the site of a crime that shattered a family and left behind a mystery still whispered about decades later. So, was justice truly served? Or does the real story of Ted Ammon's murder remain locked behind secrets, half-truths, and lies? One thing is certain: no amount of money, no glittering mansion, no promise of love can erase what happened in that East Hampton bedroom on a quiet October night. And that's the chilling story of the murder of Ted Ammon. A tale of love turned toxic, wealth turned deadly, and a family torn apart forever. But I want to hear from you. Do you believe Daniel Pelosi was the true killer? Or do you think someone else, maybe even Generosa herself, played a bigger role than we'll ever know? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime cases where the truth is stranger and darker than fiction.